For most people watching the morning broadcast, Al Roker appears exactly as they've known him for decades. Warm, steady, and quietly optimistic as he delivers the day's weather, with the kind of reassuring presence that feels almost like a familiar neighbor stopping by the kitchen table. But behind that public rhythm of early alarms, studio lights, and cheerful forecasts lies a far more thoughtful story about partnership, ambition, and the delicate art of keeping a marriage deeply connected while both lives move at extraordinary speed, a balance that his wife, Deborah Roberts, has spent much of her life learning to navigate with grace and honesty. Deborah's career in journalism demanded its own long hours, travel schedules, and relentless curiosity about the world, and in the early years of their relationship, she sometimes wondered whether two people driven by such demanding professional paths could still preserve the emotional closeness that first brought them together. Ambition can be energizing, but it can also quietly place distance between two people if they are not careful, and Deborah understood that the real challenge was not choosing between career and marriage, but learning how to protect the quiet emotional spaces where love continues to grow. For viewers who grew up watching Al's easy humor and gentle optimism, it might be surprising to know that many evenings in their home are spent not discussing television ratings or career milestones, but reflecting on the ordinary details of life that remind them who they are beyond the spotlight. Conversations about family memories, shared worries about the future, or simple laughter over stories that never make it onto a broadcast. Deborah often says that one of the greatest lessons she learned over decades of journalism is that professional success can fill a schedule but cannot replace emotional presence, and that realization slowly reshaped the way she approached both her career and her marriage. There were seasons in their lives when deadlines and assignments pulled them in opposite directions, when airports replaced quiet dinners and phone calls replaced long conversations. And during those times, Deborah occasionally felt the subtle tension that many couples experience when both partners are deeply invested in meaningful work. Yet instead of ignoring that tension, she and Al developed a habit of acknowledging it openly, treating their relationship not as something that would automatically survive busy years, but as something that required deliberate attention and care. Al's perspective on the matter was often refreshingly simple. No matter how demanding the outside world became, he believed the most important audience he would ever have was the family waiting for him at home, and that belief guided countless small decisions that rarely appeared in public narratives about his career. Deborah admired that steadiness, even as she continued pursuing her own ambitious reporting projects, and over time she discovered that ambition itself was not the enemy of emotional closeness. The real challenge was remembering that achievements mean far more when they are shared with someone who understands the effort behind them. As their careers matured and their reputations grew, Deborah began to notice something meaningful about the audiences who followed their work. Many viewers were now in their 60s, people who had spent decades building careers, raising families, and slowly learning their own lessons about partnership and sacrifice. When Deborah spoke publicly about balancing professional goals with sustaining a deep emotional bond, those viewers often responded with heartfelt letters describing their own journeys, reminding her that the questions she wrestled with were not unique to journalists or television personalities, but part of a universal human experience. She realized that many couples reach a point later in life when they look back and ask whether they truly stayed connected while chasing their ambitions, and that reflection can be both comforting and bittersweet. For Deborah, the answer came not in grand gestures, but in the quiet continuity of shared moments. Long walks after especially busy weeks, the comfort of watching an old film together, or the simple reassurance of sitting side by side while discussing the day's events. Al had always possessed a gift for making those moments feel meaningful, perhaps because years of speaking to millions of viewers each morning taught him the power of warmth and sincerity. At home, that same warmth created a space where Deborah could step away from the intense focus of journalism and simply be herself, curious, thoughtful, and occasionally uncertain about the future in ways that felt surprisingly ordinary. One evening, after returning from a demanding assignment, Deborah found herself reflecting aloud on how easily ambition can convince people that they must constantly prove themselves. Al listened quietly before reminding her of something she had once told him years earlier, that the real measure of a life well lived is not how many professional victories a person accumulates, but how deeply they remain connected to the people who matter most. That reminder stayed with Deborah, not because it diminished the value of her work, but because it placed it within a larger, more meaningful context. As time continued its steady rhythm and both of their careers reached stages where reflection naturally replaced relentless striving, Deborah felt grateful for the partnership that had quietly anchored her through decades of change. She knew that ambition had shaped her life in powerful ways, opening doors to stories and experiences she would never have otherwise encountered. But she also knew that sustaining a deep emotional connection with Al required something even more valuable than determination. It required humility, patience, and the willingness to slow down long enough to truly see one another. And in that realization, she discovered a kind of wisdom that resonated deeply with the audience who had watched their journeys for years, that success may bring recognition and opportunity, but the enduring richness of life is found in the relationships that remain steady long after the cameras fade and the headlines move on.